So if you've done any traveling around New England, you are familiar with the fact that almost every New England community's center can be seen from a distance because of the spire of the white church located there. Now here in West Springfield, this iconic old white church, that's what they call it, all over the Pioneer Valley, the old white church, which is in fact a congregational church, and in West Springfield it is in fact the second congregational church, which was built to replace the first congregational church, which had been established, I believe it was in 1693, 10 years after a terrible community tragedy. But this old white church, replacing the second church which burned, the thing about this church behind me is it's not in the center of West Springfield, but in fact more than a mile away from that center, far from where the original church it replaced was located. The old white church is the product of the fact that West Springfield as a community had divorced itself from Springfield and had spread out a little bit, so that the gentleman that funded that church's creation was actually from the north side of town. And there were many people on the north side of town. And John Ashley, who today in this community has a school named after him, funded the building of this church out of his own pocket as long as the congregational community agreed to use this church for 100 years. They wouldn't have to pay him back. They could use it free of charge for 100 years. That's a pretty big church to be funded by one man back then. John Ashley must have been doing pretty well.
He certainly was doing pretty well. He had a village named after him. But on this 1831 map of West Springfield, we can see Agawam and Feeding Hills, as well as current West Springfield and Holyoke, all part of what was then West Springfield. So you can understand why Ashley, who lived north of the center, which I'm zooming in on now, and the original church, which you can see right there, would have wanted the church to be in a more central location. Ashley was aware of the problem that geography played in West Springfield. He remembered the problems with Springfield, having parishioners cross the river to attend church, or townsmen having to go across the river annually for the town meeting. And he saw the writing on the wall. He knew that Holyoke's Irish parish was growing quickly, as were Feeding Hills and Agawam.
West Springfield had broken off from the city of Springfield in the year 1774, but it had problems with the community earlier than that, much earlier. In fact, people on the west side of the river were required by law to put in 6 days of road work per year as their tax allocation. Imagine that. Imagine paying taxes by working on the community's roads. And if you know about Massachusetts, that's the secret to that crazy excise tax that we pay, which is a tax assessed per axle of the vehicle we're driving. Every vehicle with an axle has to pay taxes in this state. And that tax goes back to the colonial period when the excise tax was used to fund the road construction that everyone was mandated, all property-owning males were mandated to participate in as part of their tax assessment. Here in West Springfield, in the year 1683, right on the other side of this cemetery, we're looking at a hill that brings us down to Riverdale Road. And on the other side of Riverdale Road is the mighty Connecticut River, and the city of Springfield, the center today, is just barely visible through the trees. So in West Springfield, everyone had to attend church in Springfield. And that involved a river crossing. There was no bridge yet. The first bridge wasn't built on that river until the time of Lewis and Clark, 1804. The first bridge was completed over the Connecticut River. So it was a big feat at the time. It was a toll bridge, by the way. But the point is, they had to get in boats and board ferries and get across the river to go to church. And there was a family from town, the Bedurtha family, one of the founding families of the city of Springfield. They were living on the west side of the river, and they crossed the river with their newborn granddaughter, little Mercy Bedurtha, who was supposed to be baptized that very day. And in March of 1683, their boat capsized in the river, and 5 Bedurtha family members were drowned. The grandfather, grandmother, mother, I believe the father of Mercy survived. But 5 family members drowned in the icy and ice-choked waters of the Connecticut River. This led West Springfield to demand from the state of Massachusetts' Puritan government their own parish church. And that was granted 10 years later. They had to cross the river, figure it out, 52 Sundays a year for 10 more years. So 520 more river crossings had to occur before they were given their own church, which this white church here replaces. So John Ashley, kind of a rabble rouser, but I feel like I would have liked him, stood up to the founding families of West Springfield. He was probably one of them, so he didn't do a heck of a lot of standing up, but he basically said to them, we need to have a more centrally located church, because the center of West Springfield was down near what was called the Hay Place, which is where their first Congregational church was built when they got the right to build their own parish church. And so John Ashley funded the church, which was built here on this hill, and it made the poor minister, Joe Lathrop, have to ride up the hill. He couldn't just walk out the door and into the church next door. He had to ride up the hill from his home to conduct services here in this church. But it's certainly more centrally located than the old church about 1.5 miles away was. And interestingly, just 100 years after John Ashley built the church, when the lease expired, the West Springfield Congregational Community built another church and abandoned this one so they could get back in the center of West Springfield where they belonged. And this church went through a history beyond what it had been intended for many years, being a Masonic temple. And when I was a kid, I used to run around in there. We used to climb up into the steeple, which was a little bit dangerous. Today, it's a private residence. But this is the old white church in West Springfield. It's got a little different history than most of the white churches that you'll see in New England communities, and it certainly isn't in the center of West Springfield. And this church is presiding still on its height over the town of West Springfield, which turns 250 years old this year, as the town got its independence ultimately from Springfield in 1774, when the population of West Springfield outgrew Springfield. So that in the town meeting that occurred annually every April or May, the voters on the west side of the river could outvote those on the east side of the river and force them to cross the river to town meeting. Because it wasn't just church that had a river crossing involved. Early on, they had to cross to go to church, and then later on, they had to cross to go to town meeting. And the West Springfield voters, outnumbering Springfield, voted that they come over to the west side or grant West Springfield its independence. That was 1773, and in 1774, West Springfield becomes an independent community under the guns of the American Revolution.